This episode of the Craftsman Online podcast is sponsored by Bricks Masons. From elegant Masonic rings that showcase your commitment to our craft to finely crafted regalia and apparel that honor your tradition, BricksMasons.com delivers quality and craftsmanship that really stands out. Shop now at BricksMasons.com and use promo code CRAFTSMAN, that's CRAFTSMEN, to receive free shipping with your first order.
The comments, opinions, and views shared during this program are of those individual Freemasons and do not reflect the official position of a Grand Lodge, concordant body, appendant body, Masonic Authority, or CraftsmanOnline.com. Welcome to the Craftsman Online podcast, the only 5-star rated Masonic podcast endorsed by the Grand Lodge of New York.
Welcome back to the Craftsman Online podcast. It's Brother Michael Arce. Good to have you here as we catch a recap of The Reading Room, a special presentation from Craftsman Online. I look forward to these. We do them 4 times a year now. They're hosted by Right Worshipful Bill Edwards and Very Worshipful Michael LaRocca. And for this one, we chose The Lost Keys of Freemasonry, Chapter 5, which is shared with anybody who wants to attend. Our reading rooms are always free events that are open to anyone who has an interest in Freemasonry, and you can stay up to date on when our next event is happening by visiting our website at craftsmanonline.com. Just click on the sign up for the newsletter link, bang, and get that information right into your inbox. For now, enjoy this portion of the reading room that was recorded originally on Sunday, October 29th.
Tonight, our panelist is Right Worshipful Cliff Jacobs, been a Master Mason since 1988, member of the York Rite of all the Bodies, Royal Arch, Cryptic Council, Knight Templar. He's also a 33rd degree Scottish Rite Mason since 2012. He's a member of several research bodies. Cliff is a manager of a television studio, loves to work with people, and loves being an active Freemason. Brother Jason Short is a Master Mason since 2022, with Aurora Grotted Baystar Lodge number 647. He's a 32nd degree Mason and a Royal Arch Mason, and is currently working on his Hoyt's Grads Academy 3rd paper.
So the topic we're discussing tonight is from the book, The Lost Keys of Freemasonry by Manly P. Hall. And it was written in the 1920s. And the specific chapter that we're reading is calling The Qualifications of a True Mason. And I'll just read the opening of that chapter, and then I would like to go to the panel to sort of discuss the reaction to that in general. It says, every true Mason has come into the realization that there is one lodge, that is, the universe, and but one brotherhood, composed of everything that moves or exists in any of the places of nature. That sort of speaks to that theme of that we're part of something greater than ourselves, right? And that we practice Masonry in our lodge, but what he's referring to is something called universal Masonry. And I want to we'll start with Brother Cliff, your reactions to that.
I like the statement, and I think it's very true. I think it just speaks to the fact that a man comes to that realization just before he knocks on the door to ask for admittance. And it harkens back to the ritual where it says, where were you first made a Mason? And we know the answer to that, right? In my heart. So I think there's something in our conscious, or maybe our subconscious, that brings us to the realization that we are a part of something larger, and it's our yearning to activate that, to be an active part of that brings us to the temple door in the first place. So I would have to agree with the statement very much.
Brother Jason?
I love that opening for this chapter. I also love that this is I think Manly's 3rd book. And at the time that he writes this, he's only 21, 22 years old. And the guy already had such a comprehensive understanding of the universal truths that exist across religion, dogma, spiritual, just around the world, what unites us all together. And what's also really special here is Manly's writing this 30 years before he himself is even initiated into the craft. And what's amazing is within just even this first paragraph, he embodies some of the most profound and ultimate truths that our fraternity is encompassed within, and that a lot, I think maybe even the majority of brothers who are Masons by name only don't actually embrace. So yeah, right off the bat, he knocks it out of the park.
Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty potent and pretty strong opening to this chapter and our reading room. It makes me wonder how, we have a tendency to think, and it is, very secret what we're learning. But, in essence, he turns this inside out. And it's almost like everything about Freemasonry, the ceremonies, the degrees, what we study, what we learn, really is about life itself and encompasses everything. It's like when we come through the inner door, when we first becoming Masons, the symbolism, some people interpret that you're actually entering into the universe. What we're really talking about is the whole universe. We're talking about that there's one lodge and it's the actual universe. And that to me pretty much blows me away. It's pretty profound. One of the things that popped out later on, it says the mystic Mason sees oneness of life manifesting through the diversity of form. And then later on, it says that each Mason gives up the personalities, sees in these diverse forms one connected life principle, the spark of God in all things. This spark of the spiritual unity makes him a conscious member of the cosmic God.
When I read that, I referred to the tree of life. And if you're familiar with the tree of life, there's the Sephirah, and Kether is the crown, and Malkuth is at the very bottom. And everything that's in Kether is present in all the Sephirah below it. And everything in Malkuth contains everything that's above it. So hence you get the as above, so below. In that sense, I think the oneness comes from the fact that we all are from the same emanation. I sometimes like to refer to Jung, who speaks of the collective unconscious, but I do believe that we are all part of the same fabric. And I think that's the oneness that Manly Hall is referring to. And I think when you come to that realization, then you start to look at the world differently and you start to act differently. Joseph Campbell, who was a big fan of Jung, he said that the God that's indwelling, that I recognize in myself, is the same God that's indwelling and that I recognize in everyone else. So again, that brings us into this collective of oneness that we all are a part of. And I think that's very true. One esoteric order teaches its members to be very conscious of every stick, every brick, every blade of grass, because all of that we are connected to. And I think once you realize that and you become aware of that, you move through the world differently than you did prior to that, gaining that consciousness.
God is in nature. God is the uniting element, the spark of life that runs through all living things, as Manly refers to there. I think that what's amazing about Masonry is, though we take our obligation upon a volume of sacred law, it's not the actual volume of law. It's not the actual words that are there on the page, but it's the story that's contained within it. That story of how we've fallen away from our nature collectively. We've gotten out of touch with the blades of grass, with the birds, with the water, with even flame. And we've fallen away from that natural connected unity that is the human family, that is the human spirit. How many wars have been fought over one translation of a holy scripture, of a story of humanity. And sometimes when we lose ourselves in the confounded nature of the designs of men, we forget that we are all part of the larger design of the grand architect.
So the idea of a key implies a door. And in Masonry, we know that doors are important, and that when one knocks on a door opens, right? Or may open, right? With the right number of knocks or the right situation. And then there's even a doorkeeper, if you will. And that's implied in his writing, right? That by adopting this philosophical approach that he's laid out, that one can unlock doors. And I'm just wondering how you respond to that there's doors seen and unseen.
What he touches on here too is sort of like the illusion of the lost keys. Is just like, we all know the universal truth, and we allow ourselves to turn our back on it a lot of the time. And as an enlightened being or a member of our fraternity, when we're brought to light, we're handed the key, the divine all living truth, that there is more to life than what meets the eyes. So yeah, I believe that there are doors all around us, doors to perception, doors to how we allow people into to know ourselves, doors that we keep shut to hold ourselves back from the rest of the world. And the keys that are presented in our craft allow us all to unlock the doors and open them up. But with that comes the responsibility of knowing that once these doors are open, once we've allowed ourselves to perceive an ultimate truth, that we then need to all hold ourselves to a higher standard. We need to all become more fatherly in the way that we interact with our communities at large, and hold ourselves to the selfless standard of giving our hearts and minds and consciousnesses out, and being the tools for the divine creator to work through and to shepherd and rebuild this world that is forever in entropy.
When Bill talks about the keys, me and Bill often talk about the spiritual practices, or sometimes it's meditation, sometimes it's visualization. It could be many different things. There's many different types of spiritual practices. Almost all of them are associated with one religion or philosophy of another. We get very risque when we communicate in settings like this, because we don't want to promote any one over the other. That might seem like it's given religious preference or preference to a particular philosophy. Although the very presence of Freemasonry allows for the freedom of this discussion. We could not have this discussion years ago. You couldn't have this discussion in some parts of the world today. And so one person had said to me that if we did start teaching some of these things directly, then we would cease to be Freemasonry. We would be Kabbalah, we would be alchemy, we would be Western occult path, we would be Christian mysticism or Jewish mysticism and stuff. And yet, because we're having this conversation, we're finding ways that we can actually maybe even show brothers the keys or the doorway to these things without it really infringing on the right of breaching this religious tolerance that we should always keep. I believe our presence allows for freedom of this discussion.
I spent about 4 years reading about Freemasonry before I decided to do anything about it. And the night when I took my third degree, I thought it was going to be like, let's make a deal. Behind door number 3 was going to open up, and it was going to be this great revelation, and I was going to be so enlightened. And it really didn't happen that way. But later on, I realized that I had received some keys, and those keys allow me to open some other doors. And I think that's important, because the more keys you have on your keychain, then the more doors you can open. And at a certain point in the ritual, we don't give the light to the candidate. The candidate's responsibility to discover the light for himself. Hence the need for the keys, and to search for the doors that key fit. And then I think that's when things start to open up. But the burden is always on the candidate. So the lodge isn't there to give you the light, but to point you in the right direction, so to speak.
Hey, it's Brother Michael Arce for Bricks Masons. The Craftsman Online podcast is now sponsored by Bricks Masons. BricksMasons.com is my only destination for Masonic shopping needs, whether it's apparel for myself or a really cool gift idea for a brother. Make BricksMasons.com your online marketplace where tradition meets innovation. We're in the first week of December and you're stuck holiday shopping for your favorite Freemason with no idea what to get them. Well, you can give the gift of choice with a Bricks Masons gift card. Gift cards start at $10 and available all the way up to $150. This allows your favorite Freemason to shop on BricksMasons.com, select their item, and if available, personalize their product and have it shipped with just a few clicks on their screen. Visit BricksMasons.com and explore their extensive catalog and elevate your Masonic experience with style and substance. Plus, our Craftsman Online podcast listeners, make sure to use promo code CRAFTSMAN, that's CRAFTSMEN, at checkout to enjoy free shipping with your first order at BricksMasons.com.
Cliff had just said, is it really then becomes Masonry as a solo path, right? Because you're going within yourself and you're finding the light as you shall there find it. But that's the challenge as well, because then having aid and support in that process, right? Because if you're just left to it, to discover on your own, that can become very frustrating or very difficult if you don't know how to take any steps forward. The other thing that I thought was interesting is he talks about, this quest or journey may take lifetimes. And as well as the opening of the door may not be of our own will and accord, right? We may knock at the door, but that there seems to be an otherworldly aspect to it as well, as far as the understanding. So I thought that was an interesting aspect to the idea of the door, and that it's just not what we're doing here and now, but it's that larger cosmic picture of how we fit into that whole process of the plan and of life itself, which makes it much different, like Brother Cliff said, of you're not going to go to a degree and get it that night, right? You may, whatever your journey is how that unfolds itself.
Back in 2018, in April, I went to go see the Valley of Guthrie, Oklahoma, that degree system. And it was the last meeting that Dr. James Tresna, who was the sage there and a brilliant man, and gave me a wonderful context to look at through when we're discussing things in Freemasonry. There's truth and there's fact. In Freemasonry, we really discuss truths, not necessarily facts. By seeing the light in all the traditions, being that we are a fraternity of men that accepts men from all religions, it gives us the ability to see the light itself, what they came to bear, not necessarily to focus too much on the individual. And we could see what's happening in the world today, so much conflict with focusing on the bearer rather than the light itself. So I was wondering if what the panelists had to say about that.
Well, like we used to say back in the 60s, it's the plan, not the man.
Yeah, and Manley stating, I think right before that section, that the true Mason has learned to be divinely impersonal in thought, action, and desire, and goes on that as a Mason, his religion must be universal. Christ, Buddha, Muhammad, the name means little, for he recognizes only the light and not the bearer. Goes back to the human family. Even before religion, we knew that there was something more. We collectively came from something, and we collectively acknowledge that light and life. And I agree that there's so much conflict that comes from people leaning too far into dogmatic thought. They put blinders on, and in doing that become hypocritical even in their approach to God. And for us as Masons, for us as traveling men in fraternity and the work that we do, we must be able to be humble in whatever presence we enter into. And in whatever culture we come into, we must be able to understand their reason and accept their light, because that is our light. There's this one quote in here where he likens to Shakespeare, and that there's a lot of brethren where within or without the lodge, the sacred ritual must remain words, you know, and even the ritual ourselves and us being Freemasons in its own right. I think that there's a trend that kind of oscillates inside of the fraternity where we become hyper critical of or hyper protective of the secrets and the ritual, and swings back and forth, kind of like what we saw with the ancients and moderns, kind of like what led up to um, the William Morgan affair, is becoming too staunch in our own ritual, in our own words, and too rigid in our own thought. That's just kind of, it's anti-intuitive. It works against what the actual work is here. So I don't know if that answers your question so much as places my thought that I do think it's important for us to all understand that we come from a universal religion, and it doesn't matter what people around us are worshiping, but that we are all worshiping the same thing.
From the writing, he says, the true Master Mason recognizes the value of seeking truth wherever he can find it. It makes no difference if it is in the enemy's camp, if it be the truth. He will go there gladly to secure it. I found that very profound thought, because often in today, right, to what you're speaking to, Michael, with fact and truth, and we get so caught up in these definitions and boxes and where things are and what, litmus tests of understanding, if you will. And if it's the truth, it's universal. So if it's the truth here, it's the truth there. And where you find it and how you understand it is really what the aim is. And we, and it goes back to the idea of the creed bearer, in a sense of who's representing that, but then they're pointing to something as well, or they're pointing to a door that then we can then unlock for better, for more understanding.
That's great, and thank you for that, Bill, because I believe it's in Anderson's Constitution, maybe. I don't know the quote exactly, but he speaks about that religion in which all men agree. And I've always thought about that. What is that religion in which all men, agree? And I think you hit the nail on the head, and because it's truth, and the truth is the truth, no matter where you find it, even if it's in the enemy's camp, as long as it's the truth. So I think maybe it's truth that is that universal religion, and that brings us back to the idea of the one, that we're all part of a collective.
And I like that, because when we think in terms of Masonry being defined as our principal tenets of brotherly love, right, brotherhood, relief, service to others, helping, and then lastly, truth, right? That universal religion, in that context of finding that universal truth, both about the universe itself, but then also about ourselves, right? And that what that speaks to. For Masonry is an abstract science of spiritual unfoldment. Material prosperity is not the measure of the soul's growth. The true Mason realized that behind these diverse forms, there is one connected life principle, the spark of God in all living things. And we touched on that a little bit, but what do you think of that idea of what is the aim of Masonry? He's saying it's not just prosperity and growth in this world, but it's the unfoldment of the soul's growth. How do you react to that?
My reaction to that is another quote from the work, which is, if he is worthy to be a Mason, he must be great enough to restrain the lower side of his own nature, which is daily murdering his Grand Master. And that a big part of our work too is acknowledging the spiritual truths, understanding that we ourselves as mortals still have to work daily to maintain a level of purity, to divest ourselves from all of the things that are holding us back, all of the things that are keeping us from achieving our fullest potential, or being wholly truthful to ourselves, our hearts and our minds. And that has a lot to do with the work that we do, not only internally but also in the world around us. Like going back to what you were just saying, that it's not about that if the truth is in an enemy's camp, and that's where we will go, is the things that are restraining us or murdering ourselves daily are sometimes the things that keep us on the wrong side of an argument. are sometimes things that aren't worth fighting for. Sometimes it takes more work to do the right thing instead of what we think others expect of us.
It's not, the proliferation of, medals and titles and honors. I think it is there to aid us in understanding our spirit. You may not get that on day one. That might come a little later, but I think it's a true science for that. I think modern day Masonry has gotten away from a lot of that, and that goes back to where the work is. The work is on the individual to dig deeper, to find out how this fraternity can aid him in his spiritual development. We're more interested in, who's going to be the next DD, So,
I also want to mention too, and I've noticed this recently. We brought a few more entered apprentices in. And this is my first opportunity to get to mentor incoming brethren. But it's really brought in the catharsis to my eyes how much Masonry has profoundly impacted my life in a positive way. But I had to allow Masonry in. I had to open the door to Masonry, not just into the lodge, but symbolically open it into my heart and allow it to make the change within myself. Allowed myself to do the work that it was asking of me to do. And that's something that I wonder how many brothers are actually doing on the outside, brothers who see it as just like an embellished supper club or an opportunity to continue their college fraternities. Is like Masonry is what you make of it, but if you allow it in, it will make of you that much more deeper and profound truth. It will open that door for you eventually.
I have a thing where I say that you cannot sell Freemasonry to men, but you can sell men to Freemasonry. And what does that mean? It means that the ideal candidate for Freemasonry is someone whose sense of self, whose involvement perhaps in their community, they're already, basically practicing Masonry. We just have to bring them to the craft. But we can't, this is something that we can just go out and try to sell to the masses, because it's not going to work. Some years ago, well, when I joined Freemasonry, there was about, I think, 140,000 Masons in the state of New York. And one year when we were down to about, 40,000, I said to a good brother who's no longer with us, Spiros, I said, we're only down to, we're down to 40,000 Freemasons. And he says, that's 20,000 too many. So.
Interesting.
So the idea is that, who we want to bring into the craft, you don't sell Freemasonry to men. We have to be better at recognizing those individuals who are better suited for the craft and bring them into the fold.
One of the things we talk about Masonry is the moral aspect or the ethical aspect of Masonry. And Brother Jason, you just touched on that in a sense of that, we have this lower self, could be considered animalistic, nature, our higher self for the worshipful master within us, if you want to use that model, right? Or however you want to call it. But then it gets to that idea of self-mastery. Right. And the idea of subduing our passions and not eliminating our passions, but being in control of our passions. And I'm just interested in your thoughts on that and what guidance you might give to someone, because it's hard that we realize that we're going from the rough ashlar to the perfect ashlar, but we also know we can't be perfect. Right. And we don't even know what perfection is. That, at the end of the day, what really matters in things. So if you follow where I'm going, right? So you mentioned the lower self. So I'm curious of your thoughts on that.
I think as we do the work, we all know whether we want to acknowledge it or not, what's good for us and what's bad for us. what's kind of right and what's kind of wrong. And a wise brother had pointed out to me once that in martial arts, when we are bent in the wrong direction, that's what brings about pain. Part of the work of the first degree, in a general sense, is allowing ourselves to acknowledge what our life is without bending in the directions that we know cause us pain. I think part of the work within ourselves is acknowledging that we are not perfect beings. We all have some sort of a past or some, juvenile things that have always been juxtaposed to that grand master that we see ourselves being, the ideal man that maybe each and every one of us, and coming into the fraternity, wants to elevate. And our work becomes allowing the path of least resistance for that grand master to take the step onto the floor, to be there with us and be ever present.
I find a lot of wisdom in the actual meaning of the word passion. It comes from the Latin word to suffer, as in compassion means to suffer with. So I see this as a directive to monitor my thoughts, my speech, and my actions, not to create unnecessary suffering to myself or someone else, using that, philosophical version of the towards Freemasonry. So are we supposed to subdue that passion too? And my response was, well, it's kind of a shortened form of, if you listen to the prayer in the beginning and the end, it says discordant passions. So it's when we learn not to cross that line. Going back to the question of that this is an abstract practice, maybe a way to say it is that it's done in many ways. You could go to psychotherapy, you could meditate, you could journal. But I think one of the most important parts of this is interacting with other brothers in Freemasonry is almost like a psychodrama where it becomes therapeutic, the lessons, and you start realizing that it's teaching you something about yourself if you only pay attention.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Craftsman Online podcast. If you've enjoyed this, you can always tell Siri or Alexa to play the Craftsman Online podcast. We're available with new episodes every Monday morning. Until next time, let peace and harmony prevail.